3 feet down in a Virginia sand quarry under prickly pear and blowing dust, a trowel scraped past a clean layer of Clovis tools, the layer that was supposed to be the oldest human floor in America. Below it, where nothing should have been, sat blade flakes and charcoal. The lab came back at 18,000 years. That's 5,000 years too early. For 60 years, the rule was simple. Nothing predates Clovis. This sand disagreed, and Virginia wasn't alone. Chile, Pennsylvania, and New Mexico were already bleeding the same problem. This was not supposed to be here, and someone spent 30 years keeping it in the footnotes. Let me take you to the place first, because the place matters. Cactus Hill sits on a wind-blown sand terrace above the Nottoway River in Sussex County, Virginia. It gets its name from the prickly pear that grows in the dry soil. There's no cave here, no cliff, no temple, just a low hill of loose sand that a quarry company was digging into for construction fill. It looks like the last place on Earth to rewrite human history. And that's exactly the problem. Because sand is loose, sand shifts. If you're a skeptic who wants to make an old date disappear, a sandy site hands you the easiest weapon in the business. You say the layers moved. You say an old artifact fell into a younger hole. In archaeology, that objection has a name, contamination, and it has killed more discoveries than any shovel ever has. So keep that in your head. Loose sand, easy to dismiss. Because later, that same sand is going to survive things it was never supposed to survive. The site was found by artifact collectors in the mid-1980s, people walking the quarry and picking up stone. Eventually, it got reported to a retired state archaeologist named Howard McCord, who recorded it as Site 44SX202. A number in a database? Nothing that would scare anyone. Then, 3 feet down, something older was waiting. Here's how the ground actually read. Picture it like a stack of pages. Near the top sat a Clovis living surface. Clovis, for decades, was the beginning, the first Americans. The fluted spear points first found near Clovis, New Mexico in the 1930s. When archaeologists found Clovis, they were supposed to have found the floor of the whole story. Nothing below, nothing before. At Cactus Hill, that layer was intact. Clovis points, one broken into 3 pieces, tools of exactly the stone Clovis people preferred. A real, undisturbed Clovis camp. That intact top layer is the whole case. Because if the Clovis floor above was sealed, then whatever sat below it had to be older. It couldn't have fallen through. The lid was still on. And below that lid sat blade-like flakes, stone struck by human hands, and charcoal, the remains of a fire. They dated white pine charcoal from that deeper level. It came back around 18,000 years old. Let that sit. Clovis is roughly 13,000. This was 18. 5,000 years older, sealed beneath the layer that was supposed to be first. To check themselves, the team dated the Clovis level elsewhere on the site. It came back around 12,900, perfectly in line with Clovis everywhere else. The young layer dated young, the old layer dated old. Everything was in order except that the old layer existed at all. Then came the strangest part. The points from that pre-Clovis level didn't match any known point type from Clovis or any layer above it anywhere in the region. This wasn't a Clovis tool that slipped down. It was something else. A stranger in the ground. One weird date is an anomaly. And the team knew exactly what anomaly meant in their world. Risk. Your name attached to a claim the whole field was trained to reject. Because here's the human part, and it starts early. Cactus Hill wasn't dug by a famous, heavily funded lab. It was worked by 2 groups, Joseph McAvoy of the Nottoway River Survey and Michael Johnson of the Archaeological Society of Virginia, professionals and serious volunteers, digging carefully in the dust of a working quarry. And in a field that guards its gates, that background alone was ammunition. It let critics whisper the word that ends careers before the evidence is even discussed. Amateurs understand what they were up against. When a discovery challenges the timeline, the field has a set of answers, and everyone sounds reasonable. The layer was disturbed, the sample was contaminated, the charcoal was old wood, the sandy soil let things move. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Sometimes those objections are correct. Bad pre-Clovis claims had embarrassed archaeologists before. Caution was earned, but caution has a dark twin. The same objections that catch real mistakes can bury real discoveries. If your answer to every early date is, it must be wrong, you never have to change your mind. You just say contamination until the person defending the site gets tired, or gets old, or gives up. And here's what makes this bigger than one quarry. These people weren't the first to hit this wall. Others had already been bloodied for saying the same thing. To understand why the Virginia sand mattered, you have to leave Virginia. Go south, all the way to the bottom of Chile. There's a site down there called Monte Verde, and it is the ghost that haunts this entire debate. A young archaeologist named Tom Dillahay started digging there in 1978 with his colleague Mario Pino. And Monte Verde did something almost no site does. It was buried under a peat bog, and peat preserves things that normally rot to nothing. So instead of just stone, the team pulled out wood, wooden hut frames, tent stakes with cords still knotted around them, rope, plant fiber, even seaweed carried up from a shoreline dozens of miles away, proof these people were moving across a landscape, gathering from the coast, living a real life. And the date came back around 14,500 years, more than 1,000 years before Clovis. You'd think preserved rope and wooden architecture would be a gift. Instead, it was treated like a threat, because Monte Verde didn't just add a date, it attacked the whole model. Clovis first said the first Americans came down from the north as big game hunters. Monte Verde showed settled people at the far southern tip of South America, gathering plants and seaweed more than 1,000 years too early. If they were down there that early, somebody had to be much further north, much earlier. The clean story broke. So the field came for the site. The resistance was fierce and personal. Papers got pushed back. Dillahay's youth was used against him. The remoteness was used against him. For years, the respectable position was that Monte Verde was somehow wrong. It took Dillahay nearly 2 decades to win. Think about what that costs a human being. Half a career spent not making new discoveries, but defending one you already made against people who had every professional reason to need you to be wrong. The turning point came in 1997. A group of senior archaeologists, including one of the most hardline Clovis first defenders in the world, Vance Haynes, traveled to Chile to inspect the site in person. And after seeing it, they largely conceded. Monte Verde was real. It was pre-Clovis. That was supposed to be the moment the wall came down. But notice how it came down. Not with an apology for 20 years of attacks on a man who was right. It came down quietly as a shift. The certainty didn't confess. It just moved. And Monte Verde was only the second site with this problem. There was a third, and it turned into open warfare. Go to Pennsylvania. A rock shelter called Meadowcroft, dug from the mid-1970s by an archaeologist named James Adivasio. It's an overhang where people camped, on and off, for thousands of years. Adivasio has called it the longest occupied site in the Americas. And in the deepest layers, the radiocarbon dates pushed human occupation back to somewhere around 14 to 16,000 years, again before Clovis. And not one lucky date, more than 50 radiocarbon dates, stacked in proper order, old at the bottom, younger toward the top. And still, the field would not accept it. The main attack was contamination. Critics, including Vance Haynes again, argued coal and the surrounding geology could have leached into the samples and inflated the dates. On paper, a fair question. But Adivasio's team fought it point by point, like a cross-examination. There was no coal seam, only tiny, isolated flecks of a coal-like material that doesn't dissolve in water so it couldn't wash into the samples. And it was separated from the living floors by a foot or more of undisturbed sediment. The dates ran in correct order. If contamination was randomly seeping in, you would not get such a clean sequence. Adivasio spent his entire career defending that site. He had a bitter phrase for those early dates. He called them the ones that will not go away. And that's what he became too. For a generation of archaeologists, a cautionary tale, the guy who wouldn't let it go. So count them. Chile, Pennsylvania, Virginia. 3 sites, 3 different landscapes, all bleeding the same wound. All pre-Clovis, all dismissed, all defended by people who paid for it. 1 site is an anomaly. 3 start to look like a pattern. Now come back to Virginia, because Cactus Hill did something the critics really did not want. It refused to stay a single lucky find. In 1996, a second independent team, the Archaeological Society of Virginia group, was working a different part of the same site, and they hit the same thing. A line of blade flakes, 2 pieces of a single broken point that fit back together, 8 inches below a Clovis level with the Clovis tools cleanly above. Read that again. 2 separate teams, 2 different areas. Same result. Human tools sealed below Clovis. That's not a fluke. That's replication, the thing science is supposed to demand. And it went further. The site produced 11 separate lines of evidence pointing the same way. The tool types stayed consistent by layer. The raw stone stayed consistent by layer. There were hearths contained inside specific levels. There were refitting artifacts, broken pieces that fit back together showing the layer hadn't been churned. The radiocarbon dates matched. And a completely separate method, optically stimulated luminescence, which measures how long sediment has sat buried in darkness, agreed with the radiocarbon. The soil chemistry matched. Even microscopic plant fossils lined up. Here's why that matters. Any one line alone a skeptic could challenge. Maybe the charcoal was old wood, maybe the chemistry was coincidence, but you cannot explain away 11 independent lines that all agree in two parts of the site by accident. And remember that loose sand, the easy weapon from the beginning? It now had to defeat radiocarbon, luminescence, refitting artifacts, soil chemistry, and microscopic plant remains all at once. The easy objection wasn't easy anymore. So why didn't the field just fold? Because the resistance wasn't stupid and it wasn't a movie conspiracy. It was something more ordinary and more dangerous. Archaeology had been burned before by sloppy pre-Clovis claims that fell apart. So a hard rule of skepticism developed, and for a while it felt like good science. Every early date was guilty until proven innocent. The problem is where innocent kept moving. Every time a site met the bar rose. Prove it's not contaminated? Fine, proven. Prove it's not disturbed? Fine. Prove another team gets the same thing? The goalposts didn't stand still. They retreated, one objection at a time, always just ahead of the evidence, and underneath it all was something nobody likes to say. Clovis, first, wasn't only a theory, it was infrastructure. Careers were built on it, textbooks were written around it, museum displays told it, grants were shaped by it. To accept pre-Clovis wasn't to change one date, it was to admit the map at the front of every textbook had been wrong for decades, and that the people who defended it hardest had guarded a mistake. That is a heavy thing to ask a discipline to admit. So it didn't, not all at once. That's the real engine of the story. The fight was never about a piece of charcoal, it was about who gets to write the first chapter of American history, and who has to admit they got it wrong. Here's the pressure point that made it unbearable. The whole Clovis first model depended on a doorway, an ice-free corridor between two great ice sheets that opened up and let people walk down from Alaska. And that corridor didn't become passable until roughly 14 to 14,500 years ago. But Cactus Hill sat at 18 to 20,000, Monte Verde at 14.5 at the far end of another continent. If those dates were right, then people were already here, deep inside the Americas, before the only known door was even open. So how did they get in? That question hung over everything. And then New Mexico produced something you could not argue with using a spreadsheet, something anyone could understand: footprints. At White Sands National Park, in the gypsum flats of New Mexico, researchers found trails of fossilized human footprints pressed into the mud of an ancient lakeshore. Not tools that might have shifted, not charcoal that might be old wood. Footprints, the shape of actual feet. Adults, children, people walking beside the giant animals of the Ice Age, and then the ground dried and hardened and kept the shape of that walk for thousands of years. The footprint outlasted the person who made it. And it turned an argument about invisible molecules into something you can see. And the date? They radiocarbon dated seeds in the layers above and below, and it came back between 21,000 and 23,000 years. That doesn't just beat Clovis, it puts people in North America during the last glacial maximum, the coldest peak of the Ice Age, when the ice was supposed to have sealed the continent off completely. And right on schedule, the objection arrived. The seeds came from an aquatic plant called Rupia, and aquatic plants can absorb old carbon from the water, which can make dates read too old. A fair concern, a familiar one, the same shape as every objection in this story. So watch what happened next. The researchers didn't just defend the seeds, they went and got new evidence. In 2023, they dated pollen from land plants, which don't have the old carbon problem, from the same layers. It matched. They used luminescence dating on the sediment. It matched. Then, in 2025, a team led by geoscientist Vance Holliday dated ancient mud from the old lake bed, sent to two independent labs. It came back between 20,700 and 22,400 years. It matched again. Added up, and there are now around 55 separate dates on 3 different materials: seeds, pollen, and mud, all pointing to the same window. As Holliday put it, you reach a point where it becomes really hard to explain all of it away. Same layer, tested again, same answer, tested a third way, same answer. That was the problem for the old model, not one number, a wall of them. And that's when the debate changed character. It stopped sounding like careful disagreement and started sounding like people defending territory, because the footprints were personal now. You didn't need a PhD to understand a child's footprint in the mud. Now I have to be honest with you and slow down, because the story has an edge, a place where it goes further than most archaeologists will follow, and I'm not going to pretend it's proven, because it isn't. Back in the 1990s, during highway work near San Diego, crews uncovered a site now called the Serutti Mastodon. The bones of a mastodon, broken in a very particular way, spiral fractures, the kind you get when force hits fresh bone, and near them, heavy stones that looked like hammerstones and anvils. In 2017, a team published a paper in Nature arguing this was evidence of human-like activity, someone breaking those bones open. And the date they proposed was not 18,000 years or 23,000. It was 130,000 years. I want to be clear. Most researchers reject this, flatly, and their main objection is powerful. There are no actual stone tools, no worked blades, no flakes, none of the unmistakable cutting tools you'd expect from butchery. Even Adovasio, the man who fought his whole life for pre-Clovis at Meadowcroft, was skeptical. Broken bones and heavy rocks can be produced by natural forces. Extraordinary claims need the tools, and the tools aren't there. So no, this is not the new timeline. Don't walk away thinking humans were confirmed in California 100,000 years ago. They weren't. But here's why Cerutti still matters, even in rejection. It shows the shape of the fear. For 60 years, the ceiling was 13,000 years, and it felt solid. Then Monte Verde cracked it. Then Meadowcroft and Cactus Hill pushed past it. Then White Sands blew through to 23,000. And once that ceiling was gone, the argument no longer had a comfortable top. If you can move the date once, what stops it moving again? Serutti is what that fear looks like staring back at you. That's exactly why the field pushes on it so hard. So, step back. A model that was near doctrine for 60 years, and one by one, sites in different countries, dated by different methods, defended by different people, kept refusing to obey it. How does a paradigm that big actually fall? Not the way you'd think. Not with a press conference, not with anyone standing up and saying, "We were wrong and we're sorry to the people we attacked." It fell quietly. Watch the language. In the textbooks, Clovis first softened into Clovis era. The confident sentences grew hedges. Museum labels got rewritten in more careful wording. The migration maps sprouted new arrows and question marks. The old certainty didn't die. It changed clothes, and the human cost never got paid back. Dilhay spent close to 20 years doubted before he was proven right. Adovasio spent his career as the field's warning label. The Cactus Hill teams got waved off as amateurs, digging in loose sand. Every one of them was defending the same simple, dangerous idea that the map could be wrong. And the reward for being right early, in this field, was to be treated as reckless until everyone else slowly, silently caught up. That's the part that should stay with you. Nobody had to hide the evidence. Nobody burned a single bone. Doubt did all the work a conspiracy never had to. You don't need a villain when you have inertia. So if people really were here before the only known door was open, how did they get in? This is where the map itself starts to move. The leading answer now is the coast. Instead of walking down a frozen inland corridor that didn't exist yet, the first Americans may have moved down the Pacific shoreline by boat and on foot, along a rich edge of kelp forests and sea life, sometimes called the Kelp Highway. You don't need the door in the ice if you go around the whole thing by water. And then there's the reason Cactus Hill specifically became explosive, because it's on the Atlantic side. Its blade tools reminded some researchers of stone tools made by Ice Age people in Europe. And in 1998, two archaeologists, Dennis Stanford of the Smithsonian and Bruce Bradley, proposed something radical, that Ice Age Europeans could have crossed the edge of the North Atlantic ice and reached America's east coast. They pointed to sites like Cactus Hill as support. I have to be straight with you, because this is the speculative edge, not the established center. That idea, the Solutrean hypothesis, is largely rejected today. The strongest reason is ancient DNA. When you read the genomes of early Americans, the ancestry points back to Asia and Siberia, not Ice Age Europe. So Cactus Hill's tools are strange and unexplained, but they are not proof that Europeans arrived first. So separate the layers cleanly. Established. People were in the Americas well before Clovis. That's not fringe anymore, it's the new mainstream. Debated. The exact roots and exactly how old the oldest sites really are. Speculation. The Solutrean crossing and the 100,000-year claims. Keep those in different boxes, and the picture stays honest without losing an ounce of its shock. But here's the haunting part. During the Ice Age, sea levels were far lower than today. The coastlines those first people would have walked, camped on, and buried their dead along, the very places the earliest evidence should be, are now underwater, drowned by thousands of years of rising sea. There are even submerged sites, suspected off the Virginia Capes, off Cape Charles and Cape Henry. The best proof of the first Americans may not be missing. It may just be flooded, sitting in the dark on a coastline that no longer exists. So come back with me one last time to that quarry in Virginia. 3 feet of loose sand, a clean Clovis floor, and below it, where the textbook said there should be nothing, blade flakes and the ash of a fire, 18,000 years old. 2 teams found it, 11 lines of evidence backed it, and a field built on Clovis first spent years explaining why it couldn't be true. Here's what changed. The wall is gone. Nothing before Clovis is finished as a rule, but notice what did not get answered. We still don't know who was truly first. We don't know how many peoples came or how many routes they took or how far back the real beginning goes. And there's a quiet detail in the Cactus Hill record that should keep you up at night. The people in that oldest layer don't look like a founding population, fresh off the boat, lost in a new land. They look like established foragers who already knew that river valley, who'd been there long enough to know it well, which means Cactus Hill probably isn't the first site. It's just the first one that survived the doubt. The real first sites, the earliest camps, the earliest fires, the earliest footprints, may be eroded away or mislabeled in some museum drawer or drowned under the Atlantic. The old story didn't collapse in public. It slipped quietly out to sea. And somewhere under 3 feet of Virginia sand, a coal trench still holds the shape of a fire that someone lit 5,000 years before history said anyone was there to light it.